Okay, welcome to day 4 of our Paint 31 Animals in 31 Days challenge. We are on to pandas. Pandas has won the vote between pandas and elephants, as you can see here. This is from my Instagram story where most of the votes were cast, but I have also counted any votes that came in from LinkedIn, directly to my email, or that were commented on previous YouTube videos. So we're gonna paint a panda today, and it's gonna be so fun. The reference image I have chosen has a tree in it, so we're gonna play around with some bark textures as well as give you some tips for how to paint really dark fur and really white fur, because pandas have both. So it's gonna be a great video to play around and give some painting tips for. If you wanna see how my last painting, day 3, the hippos, was created, you can click on this video up in the cards. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on that notification bell if you are enjoying my painting tutorial videos of my time-lapse talking through my art paintings. So I will pin a comment to this video for the most recent animals that are being voted on, because I don't know what they are yet. And without further ado, we're gonna go paint some pandas. So starting with the background. Okay, so the initial background I started as with this kind of green color in the browns was way too bright. It kind of looks like a pretty gross green in my personal opinion. So you see when I go back over and do the second coat, I'm really adding a lot more blue tones to it, and that kind of helps knock some of the yellow out of the green paint pigment that I was using. The goal of this, because I know that there's going to be a tree in the middle with the panda on it, is to kind of create a really smooth, almost like a bokeh effect. In photography, that's where you have the blurry background. So I'm trying to do that kind of effect with the background, so you get that kind of focus. And I'm trying to go from like a brown, more kind of like under forest growth to a brighter, you know, kind of like sunlight through trees on a really cloudy, overcast kind of day is the feeling and the tones to this kind of painting. So what I'm doing here is I have a old paintbrush, and I'm just kind of using it to kind of stab at the canvas, and that kind of creates this like really loose, it looks like it's blended, but it's really just kind of like a bunch of like dotted, I don't know how to describe that motion. But anyway, now we're back into the block and stage. So you can see I've done the chalk sketch of the tree and our little panda bear sitting in the tree. To get the paint to cover with the type of paint that I use, I have already done 2 layers on the head of the panda, and I'm just trying to really loosely get the approximate color tone in. So if you kind of look closer at the canvas, it looks pretty streaky at this point, as it always does, but that's why you have to just do multiple coats and build up the layers with this kind of paint that I'm using. So it's a pretty thin layer that is going on here. And I'm just trying to be mindful of where its arm is, where its legs is, like how the transition between the different fur looks, and block in all of the colors so we kind of have a really good idea in the first 2 hours what the painting is going to look like. I always like doing this, like blocking in everything first, because then you can really get a really quick idea of if it's working. If there's any design elements you want to change, if a branch looks funny, there's still time at this stage to entirely kind of re-go over the background of a section. And it's not really detailed fur, it's pretty much just blocked in the colors. So if I mess up any part of the animal or a different branch or the background, it's a low time investment if you have to redo stuff. That's all I'm trying to say. Yeah, so now we're going and adding some kind of shadows of the tree. And in the image, it has a really cool different textures in the bark and different knots and stuff that I wanted to make sure I included. So this is kind of getting in a rough idea of what the eyes are gonna look like. And it was a bit of a struggle trying to make sure that the eyes stood out from the rest of the black fur around it. And I'm Skyping some friends at this time in the video as well. So if you see me talking to the left, there's a separate video chat going on from my camera that's happening. We have a weekly Dungeons and Dragons game that I used to run in Vancouver when I lived there, and it's carried on with the same group of friends now. So we play every Wednesday, rain or shine, painting challenge or no. So I was multitasking being in another world. And getting to talk to friends while working is such a great benefit to doing this, and it's really nice because you're able to kind of catch up with more people and stuff. So now I'm trying to work on kind of refining what the fur detail is going to look like, and you can see I kind of have to go over it 2-3 times to really get the fur to contrast, because going black to white or white to black does take quite a few layers to really cover such a drastic color change, and you want to make sure those edges are really nice and sharp. So any area where it's fur overlapping with the background color, I'm kind of doing now. Where it's overlapping with the trees, I'm not really focusing on yet because I haven't painted the final bark. So I'm kind of working on painting backwards, forwards, but I wanted to start with the panda just to get an idea of what I was looking at for how much time it was going to take to paint this kind of fur. Every fur texture is kind of different to really get a good assessment of how it works. And you can see when I painted its claws there that I added a little bit of a gray near the base of the nails to help it kind of gradient out. So that's one of the transparent colors that I used there. And I'm also using a transparent brown color that I went over and kind of did some warming up of the fur. And I'm obsessed with transparent paint. I think it's so handy because you can save all of your details but entirely change the color of something. And it's just so great to use. Right now I'm working on the iguana painting, which I'll obviously talk about in the next video to come, but I'm pretty much painting the whole thing in white dots, and then I'm gonna color the scales afterwards. So that video is gonna be really exciting because it's gonna be a really great example of how like the power of transparent pigments can really work for you as an artist. It's really fun trying to get the different shadows of white and the different shadows in the dark fur and trying to figure out how they're going to match together. And around the edge of its leg, to add a little bit more contrast, I did add some light fur. It's kind of how the background light catches on the outside of fur. Even though it's a dark color, it kind of gives it a bit of a halo effect. So you can see around its bottom legs, we kind of have that similar effect that we've been able to achieve with paint. So now we're going in with a liner brush and just kind of adding a bit more of the details. I'm switching back and forth between an old paintbrush that's about 1/2 centimeter wide, and the bristles are all splayed out, which is what I'm doing for the bulk of the fur. And then I'm using a liner brush to kind of add single strands and really be intentional with the directionality that I'm putting the lines of the fur. So the white fur is all a mix of different like cool gray blue tones and then really warm gray or kind of brown tones. The panda's face actually gave me quite a bit of challenge for 2 reasons. First, it was really hard to make it not look like a really old panda, but still be able to see the texture in the fur around its eyes. So that took a bit of practice to kind of really get right. And adding the dots, get the little sparkle in the eyes is the best part. The animal really comes alive as soon as you do that. The nose and mouth area, I spent a lot of time on. You can see me doing the same kind of dot texture that I did for the hippo nose in the panda. And the shadow right below the nose, how it kind of has like a bit of dark fur kind of in the mustache-ish area. And then the actual curve of its mouth shadow were really difficult visually to get really clear in my mind, like the proportions of. So you're gonna see me going back and forth on those 2 shadows quite a bit here, trying to get them to a point where I could step back and pretty clearly see that that's the panda and the whole expression. And one of the reasons I was having such a struggle with it is because the nose is supposed to jump forward in the perspective of the painting, but yet we have all this nice creamy yellow fur kind of around the panda's head. So it was really difficult to get that perspective of it jumping out of the canvas at you as being like one of the closest things to you as the viewer. And now I've jumped onto painting the tree bark. You can see I was kind of trying to do some stuff with the sponge there for a little bit, and that wasn't working, so I stopped. I was also trying to just paint the details in the bark. So I kind of start lightening up this part that's kind of the torn tree bit. And at some point soon, I also go in with a black liner brush and try to paint details like the lines of a tree. That wasn't really working either. So I actually ended up using a trick I learned from painting murals, as I've started here now, which is just doing a bunch of really short strokes where they start and end kind of narrow along the tree, and then building up the texture from there. So I've done this with a tree that I painted for a client this past fall. And it was a life-size tree, so it was a bit different to do with a smaller brush now. But basically I started off with an almost white, and now I've gone to like a very light brown color. This is a lot lighter than the base of the tree is gonna be, but with transparent paints, like I've said and will continue saying because it's my favorite thing, I'm just focused on the detail. So trying to get the texture of the bark right, and then I'll go back and I can color correct it after the fact. It's a little hard to add light when you're color correcting it, because when you're laying pigments on top of something, you're gonna make it darker innately. So I'm trying to aim for the tree lighter than I would want it to end up in the final painting. But yeah, so now with a kind of mid-tone brown, I'm really getting into that knot at the top right corner. And now I'm dry brushing. So now I'm taking paint that I've mixed to being the right pigment, and I'm dry brushing in those shadows, and it helps fill in all the details inconsistently to the pattern that I've just painted. And inconsistently is important because then it makes it look like it's not just one pattern. So you kind of see I've added some really like an orange warm brown just to a few areas. You're not evenly coating it. When you're doing this a bit more sporadic, it helps add a lot of different depth and texture in the bark to different areas. And now that the bark's done, we can go in and finish the rest of the panda. So now I'm able to paint the fur on the right side of its body. And going in with a liner brush to really get the shape of the panda and its leg hanging over. And then I can kind of help fix the color around the rest of the head as well, just because I wanted to make sure that it matched the head of the panda and also the curve of its body. And I noticed that its ear shape was a tiny little bit off still, so now I'm going back in and fixing that. And that about wraps it up. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial on how to add some color to dark fur and really white fur and get a bit of perspective of how the light is kind of peeking around through the edges. We had some bonus tips on how to paint background textures like tree bark really quickly. So I think it turned out pretty good, even though it was a bit of a struggle, part of it there. And yeah. I am gonna go head off and paint that marine iguana that won the vote. If you want to see the full playlist of paintings in this series, you can check out this video below. And we'll see you guys later.